Welcome back. I said at the February conference that the top word in 2020 seemed to have been unprecedented. Well, the word for 2021 is starting to sound like hybrid, and I don't mean electric cars. But what does hybrid mean when it comes to the workplace? And how does it relate to our current situation? Here to enlighten us is an architect who specialises in workplace strategy, author of the Reba book, Future Office, from Cushman and Wakefield, where she's their head of total workspace for EMEA. Here is Nicola Gillen.
Thank you, Martin. Happy to be here and looking forward to talking about hybrid working. The first question that I want to really ask is, how new is this new normal? Some of you may be familiar with some of these books, which go back to 1983, and you'll certainly, I'm sure, many people will know the 1997 book by Frank Duffy, The New Office, where many of these ideas about virtual workplace and distributed workplace originated through DEGW and work with many other practices and universities. So what I'm told a lot at the moment when I talk about these things is, yes, these ideas were around then, but nobody was really listening. So I think COVID has really changed that, and people are certainly listening now. So, what's changed in relation to COVID? Well, to look at that, I'm going to take a look at three very recent publications and draw material from these. The first is a new RIBA book that came out earlier this year called Rethink Design Guide, Architecture for a Post-Pandemic World. And I'll then go into some data that we've been gathering globally over the past 15 months. And then into Reimagine How and Where the World Will Work, which is a journal paper that came out again last year. So taking these one at a time, the first is really the RIBA Design Guide, where we look at key changes across a whole range of building typologies. And one very interesting point is that these drivers are affecting all types of buildings. This is not just related to offices. And one of the main key points is that COVID was a catalyst, but not a cause. Most of these initiatives have been coming for years. We could have worked this way years ago, but we were held back through management attitudes, inertia, fear. And if we look at the retail sector, for example, it's always been much further ahead and has transformed in terms of digital transformation, even more so now over the last 15 months. There's also been a really interesting increased focus on community and a blurring of boundaries between work and life, community and commerce. Sustainability was obviously key before COVID, and it's really become a main priority now for occupiers and developers in response. And overall, what we're seeing is people shifting to working across an ecosystem of places. So we're not really talking about buildings anymore. We're talking about a whole network of workplace, retail, and residential environments. I would say one key change that has happened over the past 15 months is that C-suite are now listening to this and HR is engaged. And that's really helping us to move forward in a much more significant way. So let's take a look at the data in terms of what it's telling us over the past 15 months. And I have different data sets here from our experience per square foot survey tool, some from about 6 months into the pandemic and some from this year where there are some subtle changes. So this is from the first report that we published. And at this time, we had about 64,000 people having responded. We're now up to 125,000 and about 5 million data points. So pretty substantial in terms of the data pool. And what we saw is that 75% of people feel that they can focus as well at home as they could in the office. And in fact, collaboration has increased. That's the good news. But on the downside, connection to company culture and well-being is declining, and I'll come back to that. Also, we've found that younger generations are finding this much more difficult, and that's been well covered in the press. But overall, 78% of people, and that number has remained fairly steady, are looking to work in a flexible way as we go forward. So coming back to the younger generations, we found that the oldest in the workforce, the baby boomers, are actually having the best experience over this time. To speak generally, they were also the most resistant to flexible working and remote working pre-COVID. So again, that's a reason why we're accelerating now as they've experienced this themselves. And for the youngest in the workforce, it started off being challenges around inadequate workspace in shared accommodation or being back in parents' homes. And as I'll show in a moment, the data now points to issues around lack of social connection and learning being the big challenges. But to summarize the data overall, along the top line here, you can see data points as to why people can continue to work remotely. We have been efficient over this period, but the data points along the bottom point to why people need to come back together. And really points around learning and feeling connected to company culture are key drivers here. Only 50% of people are feeling connected to company culture, and that's probably one of the biggest alarm bells when we present this to C-suite. This data here is from this year, and so you can see it's split by region here. And you can see the connection with company culture in EMEA has gotten worse. It's up to 55% struggling, 57% do not have a sense of well-being, and 48% are not learning. So again, these are pretty alarming stats for organizations. What you can see here is the data by sector. So you can see that professional services has had the best experience, and that's probably because they were very mobile before COVID anyway. And tech and media, interestingly, have had the worst experience. Now, you might think they should have adapted very well to this, and they have from a productivity point of view. But again, they're really missing the social connection. And this then is the experience data by country and region. The bluey teal color there is EMEA. And you can see that the UK is unfortunately at the very left-hand side, which means we've had the worst experience over COVID in response to working remotely, which is interesting. So what does this mean for how and where we will work going forward? Well, these are some of the key questions that occupiers are asking us. The first is how will we work? Who needs to come back to the office and how often? I think that's probably one of the most often asked questions at the moment in terms of number of days a week or a month that people might come back. And how do we keep people engaged, especially if they're going to be more remote more of the time? And what does this mean for where we need to locate in terms of cities and regions? And ultimately, what does it mean for how much and what kind of real estate do organizations need? So we've seen technology transform the way that we work for some time. This has been going on for decades, as I mentioned at the start. One of the key shifts really now is that we have a choice in terms of whether to meet in person or online, and that choice is going to stay with us. We have that choice for learning, for leisure, for work, and for health. And for a lot of reasons, that's going to be very efficient. One thing that has arisen as a result of COVID is what we're calling a new digital equality. So with the whole world in terms of office workers communicating through this screen, it has really equalized everybody's experiences. And we've seen corporates hear a greater diversity of voices in the workplace. And that's a really positive thing that they want to hold on to. But the really big challenge, of course, is managing both in-person and remote communities. That challenge was there before, but really we've highlighted it over the past 15 months. So in terms of location, we were already seeing a shift away from a centralized strategy towards a decentralized location strategy. And the question now really is how far to the right will that go? How distributed will that become? Organizations are now looking at the benefits of sourcing talent from anywhere and tapping into talent pools that they may not have been able to before. And what we have seen is regional cities winning ground, where, for example, people may have access to, good universities, better quality of life, etc. So this is really creating a radical shift in terms of location and portfolio strategies. It's important to note, however, that the future is not binary. It's not one thing or the other, as is often in the headlines. And what we can see here is data that looks to people's experience when they have a choice. So what you're looking at here on the right-hand side is pre-COVID expectations around hybrid working. The blue bar there, 59%, is what people said pre-COVID. And you can see post-COVID, that drops down to 10% there. And on the left-hand side, that looks at employee engagement, depending on the amount of time that they work remotely. So you can see there that the 41% relates to 60 to 80% of the time. And this digs into the point around choice a little bit more. Again, this is from our experience per square foot tool. On the left-hand side, the lighter blue color is the higher engagement scores. The darker blue color underneath is where people do not have choice. And you can see the spectrum there against those different questions along the bottom with the red crosses, from experience to best work to culture. And interestingly then, on the right-hand side, what you're looking at is the two solid bars here, where you've got, this is people who are frequently in the office but have choice about it. And this is people who are infrequently in the office with choice also about it. And you can see that these two lines are higher, so higher experience, than those who are either in the office frequently or infrequently but do not have a choice about it. So this is very consistent data that we're finding from around the world and across sectors. So what this points to is, we published this diagram early last year around a workplace ecosystem. And this is about people spending their time across a variety of places, from home to core office hubs, where people will go to the office more purposefully rather than by default. And they will go there for meetings, collaboration, learning, social spaces, and continuing a network of support spaces around home and office in terms of third spaces and on-demand event space, etc. So what this really points to in terms of the future of the office is that the old purpose of the office, which originated from a command and control model, people coming in order to sit in rows, working by themselves, was coming to an end anyway, and is certainly coming to an end. The idea of people trooping in and out of city centres with all of the carbon footprint associated with that, in order to work by themselves or in order to spend all day on Zoom calls, really doesn't make any sense anymore. But that does not negate the importance and role of the office. And actually, the more virtual work becomes, arguably the more important the role of the office is for communicating brand and culture, for bringing communities of people together in order to create a curated experience for staff and to help them feel engaged, because engagement is obviously so closely connected with retention and also productivity levels. So how do we get there? And this is obviously where most organizations are at the moment in terms of trying to figure this out. So if we look on the left-hand side, this is a typical allocation of space now, where pre-COVID, about half of the space would have been individual or dedicated workspace, desking, etc. Obviously, many organizations already had agile working programs pre-COVID, so that would have been individual rather than dedicated. And what we're seeing here is some organizations are looking to keep the same footprint, but reallocate the space. So reduce the amount of dedicated or individual workspace and increase shared and amenity spaces. And then on the right-hand side, we're seeing organizations do that, but also reduce their footprint overall in order to reflect people working from home or on-demand spaces. And again, many organizations, of course, had programs looking at this pre-COVID, but COVID has now really accelerated that. So what we're seeing is that change and experience management are key in terms of making this work. So in the past, we had hot desking, which is a pretty old-fashioned concept now, and obviously towards neighborhood environments. And this is more moving towards experience management going forward. So activity-based working, moving towards people management across both in-person and virtual forums, and technology-enabled collaboration through virtual tools, etc., which has obviously been considerably accelerated over the past 15 months. So what we're talking about really is, rather than trying to get it right immediately and upfront, as all organizations are in flight with this at the moment, what we're recommending is that organizations take an iterative approach towards the hybrid workplace. The vaccine is in different places in different countries. Organizations are ramping up based on that or not, as the case may be. And what the smarter organizations are doing is they're piloting different solutions and seeing what works, testing it, feeding that back in, trying it at a larger scale. Many organizations are taking a more measured approach to that and moving forward together with their leaders and their staff to try things out in a collaborative way. So what's interesting is if we learn from what's happening in Australia, of course, where the virus has been under control for much longer than it has been here. So if you imagine month 0 is COVID under control, and we're not there yet in terms of really any European country. Months 2 to 3, what they saw was public venues start to become more popular, people start to come out more. Month 1, essential frontline workers returning to the office with other departments following them. Month 4, confidence and consumer sentiment starts to pick up. Months 5 or 6, people start to come back in terms of public transport. And then in terms of month 6 onwards, looking at office occupancy picking up in a stronger way. So that's the sort of pattern that has emerged in Australia. They're not there yet. The majority of people are still working from home, but it's interesting to see how that trajectory has played out, albeit in a country where the virus was a lot less prevalent than it is in many European countries. So in conclusion, and coming back to the Rethink Design Guide that covers a lot of these ideas, the metrics are changing as a result of COVID, from looking at cost to looking at value more. And this was happening before COVID. You know, the role of physical place to meet and to socialize and to learn is more important than ever. Increasing value on experience rather than simply density or footfall. And that increased focus on community, both corporate and local, a place to connect and provide a sense of belonging to a group of people, with well-being at the heart of the development. That's really increased as a priority for occupiers. We're seeing less desking and more community spaces, and overall a flight to quality. So, you know, less real estate, but higher quality and in better locations regionally and better locations in the city. Green is mainstream. You know, occupiers are seeking more certifications around their buildings and their workplaces to maximize their experience. Their staff are demanding this more, not just about amenities, but also practical things like air quality, light, etc. People are much more focused on that now. And we're seeing an increased demand for these certifications and see that demand increasing as we go forward. But overall, we see occupiers continuing to work across this ecosystem. So again, rather than a binary choice of home or office, it's about working across a variety of places, creating value in cities, suburban and regional locations, which will be a really positive change for everyone. Thank you.